The first thing Maren Van Zant noticed was the nail. It had been driven crooked through a fresh pine board at the edge of the ridge, bent halfway down as if the man swinging the hammer had been too drunk or too impatient to start over. The board was new enough that sap still shone around the split grain. Black letters, thick and uneven, announced that the Van Zant property was for sale. Maren stood in the white Arizona heat with a bucket of beans against her hip and stared at it until the iron handle cut a red line into her palm. Behind her, the unfinished house clicked and creaked under the afternoon sun. The cedar frame had gone gray along the exposed edges. 3 rafters were up. 2 leaned. The kitchen wall existed only as a row of studs, throwing striped shadows across the floor joists. Her father had started the place before fever took him. Afterward, Maren had kept the small garden alive, milked the cow, patched harness, cooked, washed, hauled water, and watched her brothers promise every spring that this would be the year they finished what he had begun. Now there was a sale sign at the road. She set the bucket down. The beans made a soft slosh against the tin. For a while she heard nothing but flies near the horse trough and the dry scrape of sagebrush against itself. Then she walked to the sign, wrapped her fingers around the bent nail, and tried to pull it loose. It would not move. She looked toward the shed where her father's tools hung from pegs. His old iron claw hammer was missing from its hook. She found it lying beside a stack of warped boards, where someone had used it to break open a crate. The handle fit her hand the way an old door fits its frame. She set the claws around the nail. Before she could pull, hoofbeats rose from below the ridge. 2 riders appeared through the heat shimmer. Elias came first on the bay gelding, swaying a little in the saddle. Silas followed with his hat hanging down his back by the cord. Even from 20 yards away, Maren could smell the sour mix of sweat, horse, tobacco, and whiskey. Elias dismounted slowly. He saw the hammer in her hand and stopped. "You found it." Maren looked at the sign. "I found a lot of things today." Silas stayed mounted. He rubbed his nose with the back of his wrist and looked toward the barn as if he expected someone else to handle what came next. Elias pulled off his hat. His hair was damp and flattened at the temples. "We had to do something." Maren laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So you sold the ridge. We were going to lose it anyway. To who?" "The bank. Gentry. Anyone we owe." "The bank doesn't own this place. It would have. You don't know that." Elias looked at the dirt. "I know numbers." "No, you know cards." Silas shifted in the saddle. Leather squeaked under him. Elias's face tightened. "You think we wanted this?" "I think you wanted whatever was easiest before supper." He reached into his coat and took out a small roll of notes. The bills were wrinkled and greasy from his hand. "Here, this is yours." Maren did not move. "Take it." "How much?" "Enough to rent a room in town for a while." "Then what?" "You can get work, laundry." "The hotel kitchen. Mrs. Thorne said last winter she could use another pair of hands." Maren looked at him carefully. This was the brother she had fed when their mother died. She had sewn the split knee of his trousers when he was 16. She had sat awake beside him after their father's funeral while he promised that none of them would ever be turned off this land. "You sold my room before it had walls," she said. Elias's jaw worked. Silas finally spoke. "It wasn't just us. The buyer paid fair." "Who?" Neither brother answered at first. Then Silas said, "Tali Nantan." The name meant something in San Pedro. People used it in 2 ways. Men who needed a wagon wheel repaired or a door built used it with respect. Men who did not like admitting that an Apache Carpenter could cut a tighter dovetail than any white tradesman in the county used it with a curl in the mouth. Maren had seen him only twice. Once carrying a cabinet out of the church after repairing a warped side panel. Once at the general store, standing perfectly still, while the clerk served 2 men who had entered after him. "What does he want with this place?" she asked. Silas shrugged. "Workshop, lumber yard. Maybe he wants to tear the house down. It's his concern now." Maren turned her eyes toward the frame her father had raised. Elias held the money farther toward her. "We leave tonight. There's a wagon coming tomorrow for the cow and 2 mules. Take the bills, Maren." She looked at the bills, then at his shaking hand. "No." "Maren, no." She walked past him toward the house. Silas called after her. "You can't stay here." She climbed onto the unfinished porch. "You hear me?" he said. "You can't." Maren turned at the doorway that did not yet have a door. "Then the man who owns it can tell me." She carried the hammer inside. Her brothers left before sunset. They did not make a clean departure. Elias forgot a bedroll and came back for it. Silas argued over which saddlebag held the silver. One of them dropped a bottle near the trough, and the glass broke in the dust. Maren listened from the unfinished kitchen while they cursed, packed, unpacked, and finally rode down the ridge. When the hoofbeats faded, she sat on a stack of cedar planks with the hammer across her knees. The temperature dropped quickly after dark. Arizona heat had no loyalty. It could leave a body sweating at 4 and shivering before the moon rose. Maren pulled her shawl around her shoulders and watched stars appear through the open rafters. She slept little. At sunrise, she boiled coffee in a blackened pot over a small fire between 2 foundation stones. The water tasted faintly of ash. She drank it anyway. Around mid-morning, she heard a horse. One rider came up the trail. Tali Nantanta rode a buckskin mare with dark legs and a black mane. He sat straight but not stiff, wearing a faded workshirt beneath a brown vest. A tool roll was tied behind his saddle. A crosscut saw rode in a leather sheath. 2 wooden planes stuck from one pannier, wrapped in cloth against the dust. He stopped at the sale sign. Maren stood on the porch with the hammer in her hand. Tali looked at the sign, then at the bent nail holding it. His mouth moved slightly. It took Maren a moment to realize he was almost smiling. He dismounted. Without greeting her, he pulled the sign from the post. The crooked nail squealed as it came free. "You bought it," Maren said. "Yes." His voice was low and rough, not unfriendly. "You could have waited until we were gone. I was told everyone would be gone. I wasn't told anything." Tali rested the sign against the fence. "I can see that." He walked past her toward the house. Maren's fingers tightened around the hammer. "Are you going to tell me to leave?" Tali stopped beside the eastern corner post. He ran his palm down the cedar, pressed a thumb against a crack near the base, then crouched to study the stonework. "You can leave if you want. That isn't what I asked." No, you won't tell me?" "No, I will not tell you today." He opened his tool roll. Maren watched him take out a cedar spirit level unlike any she had seen. The wood was dark from years of oil. Brass plates protected the ends. A green glass vial sat in the center. He placed it against the post. The bubble drifted far from the middle. Tali stared at it. "My father set that post." "No," Maren bristled. "I watched him." Tali pointed to a shallow line lower on the wood. "Your father set it here. Someone lifted it later and packed dirt under the sill." She looked closer. He was right. The lower tool marks were her father's. The fresh wedges shoved under the sill were not. "Ilya's," she said. Tali moved to another post. "Probably. You don't know him. I know this joint." That irritated her more than an insult would have. He spent the next hour moving through the frame. He tapped beams with his knuckles, tested joists with the heel of his boot, pulled at loose braces, examined nail heads, and set the spirit level everywhere. He hardly spoke. When he found decent work, he nodded. When he found poor work, he marked it with charcoal. By noon, black marks covered half the house. Maren followed him from room to room, anger growing with every mark. "You planning to tear all of it down?" "Not all." "How much?" "Enough." "What does that mean?" "It means the house will fall if a roof is put on it now." She looked up at the bare rafters. "My father built it to stand. Your father did." The distinction landed hard. Tali crouched by a floor joist with 3 bent nails driven through its end. "These are not his." Maren knew they were Elias's before she touched them. Tali straightened. "Where is the deed?" "With you." "Apparently." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached inside his vest. The folded paper was creased and dark where hands had handled it. Maren recognized her father's name along the top. Beneath it were the signatures of Elias and Silas, both witnessed and stamped at the trading post. Her stomach turned. She grabbed for the document. Tali lifted his arm before she could reach it. "Give me that." "No, it is my father's." "It was. You knew they were drunk. They were drinking. That is the same thing." "No." The bluntness stopped her. Tali lowered the deed, but did not hand it over. "They came to me. They named the price. I said no. They came back the next day and named less. I said no again. The third day they brought Gentry and a witness from the trading post. They wanted money before the bank took their horses. You still bought it?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at the house. "Because I had seen the frame from the road. Because good cedar was being ruined. Because I need a place to work where no landlord can decide next month that my work offends his customers." Maren stared at him. At last he folded the paper again. "I did not know they had a sister living here." "Would it have mattered?" "Yes." "What would you have done?" "I don't know." It was not the answer she expected. She believed him because he did not try to make it better. That afternoon, a rider from town came with the final payment. Elias and Silas had apparently demanded the balance in person before leaving the territory. then returned when they realized Tali had not yet delivered it. Maren's brothers appeared an hour later, dusty and annoyed. Elias barely looked at her, his eyes fixed on the leather pouch Tali carried. "You have the rest?" Tali tossed the pouch into the dirt. It hit with a heavy thud. Silas dropped to one knee and untied it. Coins spilled through his fingers, bright against the red earth. Elias crouched to gather them. Maren watched her brothers scramble for silver on hands and knees. Something inside her went quiet, not numb, quiet. She no longer needed to imagine what they valued most. It was there in the dust, ringing against stones. Elias stuffed the coins back into the pouch and stood. "Come with us," he told her without conviction. "Last offer." Maren looked at his dirt-streaked palms. "I already gave you my answer." Silas glanced at Tali. "She's your trouble now." Tali said nothing. The brothers rode away for the second time. After they vanished, Maren remained on the porch. Tali returned to measuring the frame. "You really aren't throwing me out today?" she asked. "No. Tomorrow?" He set the level on a beam and waited for the bubble. "Tomorrow depends on what you decide today." She frowned. "What does that mean?" Tali pointed toward the far corner where two floor joists sagged. "It means I need to know whether you are staying because this is your father's house or because you intend to make it yours." Maren did not answer. That night she slept inside the unfinished pantry, wrapped in 2 blankets, with the hammer beneath her hand. Tali slept near a small fire by the workshop shed. In the blue hour before dawn, Maren woke to the scrape of a whetstone. She sat up. Tali was sharpening a chisel outside. The sound traveled through the frame in a steady rhythm. She watched him until the sun rose. By breakfast she had made her decision. Tali was eating cold cornbread beside his workbench when she walked up. "I know the springs." He looked at her. "I know which one dries first in July and which one stays cold enough to keep milk through June. I know the north wall needs extra bracing because the winter gusts hit from that canyon. I know where the ground heaves after 2 nights of frost. I know where Father buried the old drainage trench and where Silas filled part of it because he didn't want to dig a new fence hole." Tali chewed, swallowed, and waited. "I also know how to cook, wash, mend, and clean, and I am not offering any of those things." A faint line appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I want work. What kind? Carpentry." "You know carpentry?" "No, then you want training." "I want both." He leaned back against the bench. "Why?" "Because if I leave now, the next place I live will belong to someone else. I'm tired of that." Tali looked at her hands. They were rough from farm work, but not yet shaped by tools. "What do you want paid?" Maren had not expected the question. She named a figure that was slightly higher than the laundry in town paid women. Tali raised one eyebrow. She added, "And I sleep inside the house once there is an inside. Until then, the pantry is fine. It has no roof." I noticed. He looked toward the frame, then back at her. "The first weeks will be mostly undoing bad work. I can undo. You may hate me by noon. I already don't like you much." This time he did smile, though only for a second. Maren spat into her palm and held out her hand. Tali stared at it. "My father did business that way. I know." He spat into his own palm, gripped hers, and shook once. "Dawn," he said. "If you are late, the bargain is done." The next morning, Maren arrived while stars were still visible. Tali handed her the iron claw hammer, not her father's, his own. It was heavier and better balanced. "Pull every nail in that wall." She looked at the wall Elias had worked on the previous fall. "All of them?" "All. Some are straight. They are in split grain." She inspected the first one. He was right. "How long?" "Until they are out." Maren fitted the claws around a bent nail and pulled. Nothing happened. Tali watched. She braced one foot against the sill and yanked harder. The hammer slipped. "Again," he said. She glared at him. He crouched and tapped the handle near her grip. "Lower. Use the curve of the head. Do not fight iron with your shoulder when the tool can do the work." She adjusted. The nail came free with a long metallic squeal. Tali nodded toward the next one. By mid-morning, Maren's forearms burned. By noon, her shoulder hurt so badly she could barely lift her cup. Tali did not reduce the task. He worked 3 yards away, replacing a sill plate, measuring twice before every cut. Maren pulled nail after nail. Some came clean, some snapped. Some tore small chunks from the cedar and forced her to dig with the claw until her fingers shook. Near midday, a blister at the base of her thumb opened. Blood mixed with sawdust. She hid her hand behind her skirt. Tali noticed anyway. "Sit. I'm fine. Sit." She sat on a stack of boards. He took strips of soft buckskin from a pouch. Instead of reaching for her hand, he wrapped his own palm first. crossing the leather around the thumb and tucking the end beneath itself. Like that. Maren tried to copy him. The leather stung where it touched the blister. She hissed. Tali looked at her. Pain is information. Listen to it before it becomes damage. That sounds suspiciously like kindness. No. Kindness would be telling you to stop. She wrapped the hand tighter. What do you call this? Not wasting an apprentice. Maren stood. By sunset, the wall was bare of every bad nail. Tali made her sort them into 2 piles, salvageable and ruined. What for? She asked. So you learn the difference between bent and useless. People too? He glanced toward the trail her brothers had taken. Wood is easier. The days settled into a rhythm. At dawn they drank coffee strong enough to leave grounds on the tongue. Tali ate dried meat or cornbread. Maren sometimes fried eggs from the 2 hens her brothers had forgotten to sell. Then they worked until the heat forced a pause. Tali taught her how to listen to a saw. A smooth note meant the blade was following the line. A ragged scrape meant she was twisting it. He made her sharpen chisels until she could feel the burr with the pad of her thumb. He made her plane the same cedar board 3 times because she kept pressing too hard at the end and rounding the edge. When she complained, he handed the board back. When she swore, he handed it back again. When she finally got it right, he ran 2 fingers along the grain and said, "Good." That single word kept her awake half the night with a satisfaction she refused to examine too closely. Her body changed before she noticed her mind had changed. The soft ache of housework became a deeper, cleaner exhaustion. Her shoulders thickened, the skin on her palms hardened. Small cuts healed into pale lines. She stopped waking at every coyote call. She stopped looking down the road after sunset, wondering whether Elias might return with another disaster. There was always work to do before she could worry long enough to drown in it. One afternoon, Widow Beatrice Thorne drove up in her black buggy. The widow brought a loaf of bread wrapped in spotless white cloth and the expression of a woman carrying unpleasant news on behalf of civilization. Maren was standing on the new floor deck when Beatrice stopped below. "You look brown as a field hand," Beatrice said. "I am a field hand some days." The widow's eyes moved past her to Tali, who was cutting a mortise in the shade. "I heard you were still here." "I am, and working for him. With him." Beatrice's mouth tightened. "People are talking. They do that when they have finished their own chores. Maren." The widow's voice softened. "You have options. You could stay with me until winter. There is no shame in leaving a bad situation." Maren climbed down and accepted the bread. "What bad situation?" Beatrice lowered her voice. "You know what I mean? No. A woman alone with an Apache man, on land that used to belong to her family, sleeping under the same unfinished roof. People will decide things." Maren tore off a piece of bread. The crust cracked sharply. "People decided things about my brothers for years and never bothered telling them to stop drinking. That is different. Why?" Beatrice glanced at Tali again. He had not stopped working. The chisel struck wood with small, precise taps. Beatrice said, "Because a reputation is easier to lose than land." Maren chewed slowly. "I've lost both. I prefer the work." The widow's face reddened. She climbed back into her buggy without taking the bread back. "Marshal Gentry may come up here," she said. "Your brothers are making claims. Then he can bring his own coffee." Beatrice drove away. Tali continued cutting the mortise. Maren waited until the buggy disappeared. "You heard all of that?" "Yes." "You could pretend you didn't." "I could. But you won't." "No." Maren tossed a small piece of bread at him. Tali caught it without looking. That evening he checked the west wall 3 times. The second time, the bubble in his spirit level was already centered. Maren watched him adjust a brace by less than the width of her fingernail. "She got to you," Maren said. "No. You have checked that brace twice, 3 times. So she got to you." Tali set down the level. "People like Widow Thorne do not frighten me. What does?" He looked toward San Pedro, where tiny points of lamplight were beginning to show in the valley. "People who believe their fear gives them permission." Maren sat on the porch edge. For the first time she wondered what every town before San Pedro had been like for him. She did not ask. Tali picked up his mallet again. 2 days later the weather broke. The morning began hot and flat. By 3 a bruise-colored wall of cloud covered the west. Tali smelled the rain before Maren saw it. "Canvas," he said. That was all. They ran to the stack of treated tarps beside the workshop. The first gust struck hard enough to knock a bucket down the yard. Sand hissed across the new floor. Maren grabbed one edge of the largest canvas while Tali threw a coil of rope over his shoulder. "We cover the rafters." That wind will take it. Then we do not let it. The rain hit as they climbed. Within seconds, Maren's shirt clung to her back. Water ran into her eyes and filled her boots. The ladder trembled under them. They crawled onto the roof frame with the canvas snapping between them like a living animal. Tali tied the first corner. Maren fought the second. A blast of wind ballooned the tarp. Her foot slipped. For one impossible moment, she was looking straight down through the open frame at the floor 20 feet below. Then Tali's hand locked around her forearm. His grip hurt. She did not care. "Beam," he shouted. Maren found it with her boot. He released her as soon as her weight was secure. They kept working. Thunder rolled over the ridge. The canvas cracked. Rope burned Maren's palms through the buckskin wraps. Tali hammered stakes into temporary blocks while she tied off the grommets. Neither spoke beyond what was necessary. When the last edge was secured, they climbed down with legs that shook from effort. The workshop was the only enclosed space. They stumbled inside, dripping onto the floor. Tali shut the door against the spray. For a moment, they simply stood there, breathing. Maren started laughing. Tali stared at her. She laughed harder. "What?" he asked. "I almost died because of a piece of canvas." "You almost died because you looked at the ground." "That is worse." "Yes." He turned away, but she saw the small movement of his shoulders. "You're laughing." "No, you are." Tali opened a pouch, took out a strip of dried venison, tore it in half, and handed her one piece. "Eat." "That is not a denial. Eat." They sat on the floor with their backs against the workbench, soaked through, chewing meat that was hard, salty, and better than anything Maren had tasted in weeks. Rain hammered the roof. The oil lamp threw a yellow pool across the tools. Maren looked at the wrapped spirit level on its shelf. "You grabbed me before the canvas." Tali chewed. "That surprises you? I thought you liked cedar more than people. Cedar complains less." "That was not my question." He looked at her then. "No," he said. "It does not surprise me." Something in his tone closed the space between them more than touch would have. Maren looked away first. The storm passed after dark. By morning the tarps had held. Only one stack of boards had taken water, and Tali spread them in the sun before breakfast. Maren walked through the damp frame, touching every joint as if taking attendance. Near the rear wall she found an old leather satchel under a pile of scrap. The buckle had greened with age. She opened it. Inside were her father's blueprints. Maren sat down hard on the floor. The paper smelled of dust and old coffee. Her father's handwriting crowded the margins. Window dimensions, chimney angles, notes about winter wind. A dark thumbprint marked the kitchen page. Tali came in carrying a wet plank. He saw the papers and stopped. "You found them. You knew they were here?" "Yes. And you didn't tell me?" "I thought you would find them when you were ready to look under the scrap instead of at the road." Maren almost snapped at him. Then she looked down at the plans. The walls they had been raising matched them. Not exactly. Some details had changed, but the house was unmistakably her father's design. "You're following these. Mostly. Why?" Tali set the plank against the wall. "It was a good house. You could build anything." "Yes." "You bought the place for a workshop." "Yes." "So why finish his house?" He looked at the plan she held. "Because someone had already begun it carefully." Maren traced her father's penciled line for the kitchen window. Tali added, "And because you stayed." She swallowed. For the rest of that morning they worked from the old plans. For the first time, Maren understood that Tali had not been erasing her father. He had been separating her father's work from the damage done after him. That knowledge changed the way she looked at every beam. It also changed the way she looked at Tali. A week later, she found him asleep on the workshop floor before dawn. He had a narrow wool blanket, a rolled buckskin jacket beneath his head, and nothing else. Maren stood in the doorway, suddenly cold despite the season. She had assumed he rented a room somewhere in town. He had not. The money he paid her brothers had been nearly everything he had. The good steel, the planes, the level, the mare, and the workbench were not signs of wealth. They were a tradesman's life gathered piece by piece. Tali opened his eyes. Maren did not pretend she had not seen. "You sleep here?" "Yes." "Every night?" "Yes." "You could have told me." "Why?" "I'm sleeping in the pantry and complaining about the wind." "You are paid." "That is not the point." "It is one point." He sat up, rolled the blanket, and placed it beneath the bench. Maren watched him. "How much did you keep after buying?" "That is not your concern. It is if we are buying materials together." Tali looked at her sharply. Maren continued, "Glasses next. Yes, you went to Miller yesterday." His face answered before he did. He refused to sell to you. The glass is reserved. For who? Tali picked up a plane. Families with roots. Maren's anger arrived so cleanly that it felt useful. She took the wagon without asking. Miller's general store smelled of pickle brine, tobacco, lamp oil, and old wood polish. Two ranchers stood near the stove despite the heat, talking about cattle prices. Mr. Miller looked at Maren's work shirt and dusty boots. "No eggs today?" he asked. "I need the south window glass." His mouth flattened. "Already told your carpenter. It's spoken for." "By who?" "Customers." "I am a customer, not that stock." Maren walked to the board where prices were chalked. 4 panes, 24 by 36. "Can't help you. My father hauled your flour shipment through the snowstorm of '74. Miller looked away. "Not relevant. He did it because you had children in town without bread." "Maren, you keep a ledger?" "Of course." "Then open it." The ranchers stopped talking. Miller's face colored. Maren rested both palms on the counter. The calluses made a soft scraping sound on the wood. "Write down 4 panes at the price on your board. I'll pay it today. Or write down that you refused a cash sale because you did not like the man who measured the window." One rancher coughed into his fist to hide a smile. Miller stared at her. 10 minutes later, 2 boys were loading glass crates onto the wagon. Maren drove back to the ridge with the panes rattling softly behind her. Tali stood beside the porch. When he saw the crates, he closed his eyes for a moment. "You did not need to do that." "Yes, I did. I could have found another merchant. Farther away, higher price, yes. Then I saved us money." Tali looked at her. "Use?" Maren climbed down from the wagon. "I'm an apprentice. I'm learning arithmetic too." He took the first crate from her. Neither mentioned the word again. The roof followed. Shingles arrived in bundles bound with wire. Maren carried them up the ladder until her thighs trembled. Tali showed her how to stagger the rows, how to leave the right exposure, how to listen for a hollow tap that meant a board beneath was not seated correctly. They worked above the ridge for 6 days. The world looked different from the roof. San Pedro was a toy settlement in the distance. The road her brothers had used to leave was a pale thread. The garden behind the house looked small and stubborn, still holding 3 rows of beans and a patch of squash. On the 4th evening, Tali set the spirit level across the last course they had laid. The bubble settled. Maren lay back on the warm shingles and stared at the sky. Tali sat with one knee raised. "You never stay anywhere long, do you?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would ignore the question. "No. Why San Pedro? Work." "That is not an answer. It is the first one. And the second." Tali looked west. "My mother's people traveled through this country before the roads. There is a notch in that ridge." He pointed. "In winter, the first light comes through it." Maren followed the line of his finger. "What does that have to do with this house?" "The front hall faces it." She sat up. "Father's plans don't. No, you changed the angle, 3 degrees, without asking me. You were still threatening me with a hammer. That was a reasonable time to ask." Tali almost smiled. On the shortest day, sunrise will reach the hearth. Maren imagined it. Winter light traveling through the door and laying a bright stripe across the floor to the stone fireplace. "Why?" He took time before answering. "Because I wanted one part of this place to remember people who were here before any deed." Maren looked at the ridge again. Her father had believed land became yours when you survived enough winters on it. Her brothers believed land became yours when your name appeared on paper. Tali seemed to believe land could never be fully owned, only cared for badly or well. Maren touched the spirit level between them. "I like the 3 degrees, she said. Tali nodded. The next afternoon, Elias and Silas rode back up the trail. Maren saw them from the roof. She climbed down slowly. Elias looked thinner. Silas's coat had a tear at one elbow. Their horses were in worse condition than before. Elias stared at the new roof. "You've made improvements." Maren wiped sweat from her neck. "We've made repairs." Silas pointed toward the tool bench. "Those planes belonged to Pa." "No, the draw knife did." "No, the hammer did." Maren touched the iron claw hammer hanging from her belt. "Yes." Silas stepped forward. "Then give it here." Maren's hand closed around the handle. "Why?" "We have a buyer in Prescott. Old tools fetch good money now." She looked at him for several seconds. "You sold the land. Tools weren't listed in the deed. You left them in the dirt. They're family property." Elias dismounted. "Don't make this foolish, Maren." The old phrase stirred something in her. He had said it when she wanted to keep chickens instead of selling them, when she wanted to hire a hand during harvest, when she asked to see the bank papers. Don't make this foolish. It had always meant, Make yourself smaller so I do not have to explain myself. Maren stepped onto the porch. The tools stay. Elias's hand drifted toward his gun belt. From the workshop came a slow scrape. Shh. Tali sat on a stump, sharpening a broad chisel against a whetstone. He did not look up. Elias froze. Tali drew the steel along the stone again. Shh, Silas swallowed. We'll bring the marshal, he said. Tali tested the chisel edge with his thumb. Bring him, Maren said. The brothers left. Only when the dust disappeared did Tali stop sharpening. You did that on purpose, Maren said. No. You had 3 other chisels already sharp. This one needed work. She laughed. Tali handed her the spirit level. West post. You cannot let me enjoy anything. The post moved. It did not. He looked at her. Maren took the level and went to check. The post had moved. 3 days later, Marshal Wade Gentry rode up. He was older than Maren remembered, with gray threaded through his mustache and dust settled permanently into the seams around his eyes. He dismounted, stretched his back, and looked over the house before speaking. Your brothers say they were forced into the sale. Tali put down his square. By whom? They are still inventing that part. Gentry held out his hand. Deed, Tali gave it to him. The marshal read slowly. He checked the signatures and witness marks, then looked at Maren. They say you're being kept here. Maren stared at him. Kept? As a servant. Against your will. Tali's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. Maren lifted both hands. Her palms were dark with cedar dust. A fresh cut crossed one finger. The buckskin wrap protected her thumb. I am paid every Saturday. Gentry glanced at Tali. How much? Maren named the amount. The marshal's brows rose. Better than Miller pays his stock boy. Miller's stock boy spends half his day asleep behind the molasses barrels. Gentry snorted. Do you want to leave? No. Has he threatened you? No. Touched you against your will? No. Taken your wages? No. Then your brothers are wasting my horse. He folded the deed. Before handing it back, he looked at Tali. The paper is good. So are the witness marks, but they're stirring people. Be careful. Tali took the deed. I am careful. Gentry looked at the half-built house. Not sure careful is going to be enough. He rode away. That evening, Tali said little. Maren found him rechecking locks on the tool chest. The marshal believed us. This time. You sound like there will be another. There usually is. Maren leaned against the bench. You've lost land before. Tali's hands stopped. He did not answer. She waited. Finally, he said, My uncle had a farm near a river north of here. Papers, fences, tax receipts. A company wanted the water. The papers changed meaning. What happened? The company got the river. And your uncle? He stopped planting. Maren looked toward the house. Tali closed the tool chest. That is why I trust a level more than a clerk, he said. Maren understood then that his silence was not emptiness. It was storage. He kept old losses inside it because speaking them did not return what had been taken. The next morning, he handed her a piece of charcoal. Kitchen. What about it? Draw it. Maren laughed. From the plans? No, from your life. He walked away. Maren stood in the unfinished room. She thought about her mother's kitchen. The table too close to the stove, the flour bin where everyone kicked it, the tiny window facing west, so supper cooking happened in blinding heat. She thought about carrying water from the pump with wet hands and nowhere to set the bucket. She knelt and began to draw lines on the floor. A wide work table near the center, a pantry door that opened outward, a shelf within reach of the stove, the east window above the wash basin, a peg rail near the back entrance for aprons and coats. Tali returned after half an hour. He studied the charcoal marks. You moved the pantry. Yes, your father placed it here. My father did not cook. Tali nodded. They built it her way. That small decision did something no courtroom could have done. For the first time, the house was not only her father's unfinished promise, it was becoming Maren's choice. The kitchen walls rose faster than anything they had built before. Maren knew where every board belonged because she had imagined using the room before it existed. She could stand at the charcoal outline of the stove and reach toward the future shelf without thinking. She could picture winter light through the east window, steam on the glass, a kettle humming, bread cooling near the pantry. Tali made her cut the window header herself. The first cut wandered. He said nothing. She stared at the saw mark, cursed under her breath, and started again on a fresh piece. The second was straight. You wasted cedar, he said. I noticed. What did it cost? 2 feet of good stock and? Maren sighed. Pride, Tali nodded. Pride grows back faster than cedar. She threw a shaving at him. By then, their arguments had become part of the work. They disagreed over hinge placement, how much knotting could be tolerated in a visible board, whether a certain batch of nails from Tucson was worth the extra cost, and how long coffee could sit on coals before it became undrinkable. On that last subject, Tali had terrible judgment. One morning Maren poured his coffee into the dirt. He looked at the empty cup. That was mine. It was tar. It was coffee. It could have sealed the roof. He considered this and held the cup out again. Then make more. Maren laughed so hard she had to sit on the porch step. The sound surprised both of them. She had not laughed that freely since before her father became ill. The next major task was the ridgepole. It lay on trestles behind the house, a long cedar beam cut from a tree that had grown high in the mountains where snow packed deep around the roots. Tali had spent 2 evenings planing it. Maren had sanded the last rough places by lantern light. Raising it required more than strength. Tali rigged a block and tackle from a temporary frame. He checked every knot twice. Maren walked the beam from end to end, looking for cracks. Once it is up, he said, we do not hurry. We have been trying to get it up for a week. That is why we do not hurry. They began at dawn. The pulley complained with each pull. Rope fibers bit through Maren's gloves. The ridgepole lifted inch by inch, turning slowly above the open frame. Tali called directions from the far end. Hold, she locked the line, 2 inches. She fed rope. Hold. Sweat slid down her spine, though the morning was cold. A gust came off the canyon, and the beam swung. Maren's stomach dropped. Tali threw his weight against the guide rope. Do not fight the swing, he called. Wait for it. The beam moved back now. They hauled together. By noon it hovered above the posts. Maren climbed the ladder, carrying the spirit level tucked through her belt. Her arms trembled so badly she had to pause halfway. Tali was already on the top plate, straddling the frame. You all right? I hate ladders. You climbed the roof in a storm. I hated that too. He reached down, not to pull her up, but to steady the ladder while she climbed the last rungs. Together they lowered the beam into its housings. The cedar settled with a deep wooden knock. Maren held her breath. Tali placed the level on top. The bubble slid left. Again. They lifted one end, shaved a whisper from the joint, and set it back. The bubble moved closer. They did it a second time, then a third. At last the bubble rested between the lines. Tali ran his palm across the beam. Maren sank onto the plate, legs dangling on either side. Below them, the unfinished rooms looked small and orderly. The house knows where it stands now, Tali said. Maren drank from the tin cup he passed her. The water was warm and tasted of metal. Does a house know anything? No, she looked at him. He added, builders do. The light was turning amber. From the ridge they could see a long way west. Tali pointed toward a narrow saddle between 2 peaks. My grandmother used to describe this route. You were here before? Not on this ridge. She was, when she was young. Maren waited. Tali did not usually offer pieces of his history without being asked. She remembered water under cottonwoods below the southern wash. She said people stopped there when the flats were too hot to cross. No fences then. Maren pictured a line of travelers moving through a land without wagon ruts or survey stakes. My father used to say he discovered that spring. Tali's expression did not change. Maren winced. I suppose he did not. He discovered it for himself. There was no mockery in the answer. She appreciated that more than forgiveness. They climbed down before dark. For supper, Maren fried potatoes with onions and the last of the salt pork. Tali ate 2 helpings and pretended the second had been offered rather than taken. Afterward, they sat by the workshop door while bats flickered above the yard. Maren was rubbing pine pitch from her fingers with a rag soaked in grease. Why carpentry? She asked. Tali turned a chisel in his hand. My grandfather repaired wagons. That is not carpentry. It is when the wheel is wood. Fair. He taught me to sharpen steel before he let me cut anything. Said a dull edge makes a liar of the hand. Maren smiled. That sounds like you. It sounded like him first. She looked toward the house. My father taught me to swing that hammer when I was 9. The one you hide under your bed? I do not hide it. You sleep with it. That is different. Tali looked amused. Maren wiped the pitch away. Elias laughed when father taught me. Said there was no reason for a girl to learn anything heavier than a skillet. And now? Now Elias does not have the skillet either. Tali's laugh was quiet, almost only breath. Maren stored the sound away. The next weeks brought doors, interior partitions, and long hours of sanding. Tali treated finishing work with more seriousness than framing. He could tolerate a board that looked plain if it carried weight honestly. He had no patience for a beautiful surface hiding poor work beneath it. One afternoon he handed Maren a piece of walnut for the mantle. Sand with the grain. I know. Then why are you crossing it? Maren looked down. Fine scratches showed in the light. I hate when you are right. No. You hate when the wood proves it. He sat beside her and showed her how to change pressure near the edge. His fingers closed briefly around her wrist to guide the motion. The contact lasted only a moment. Maren felt it long after he moved away. They worked until dusk. When she finished, Tali rubbed the walnut with his palm. Again tomorrow with finer paper. Maren stared at him. You said it was good. It is. Then why again? Good is not finished. She muttered something rude in Dutch, a language her mother had taught her. Tali asked, what does that mean? Something respectful about your teaching. I am sure. The house acquired small signs of life before it was ready for life. A cup left on the kitchen sill. Maren's shawl hanging from a peg. Tali's pencil behind his ear, even when he had forgotten why he put it there. A sack of beans in the new pantry. 2 stools beside the unfinished hearth. The widow's breadcloth washed and folded in a drawer. Maren sometimes woke in the pantry and forgot for 3 heartbeats that the land had been sold. Then she remembered. Oddly, the memory no longer carried the same terror. The land had been sold. That was true. She was still here. That was also true. One night in early autumn, truth came with the smell of whiskey. Maren woke before midnight. At first she thought she had dreamed the odor. Then came another smell beneath it, scorched wood. She sat up. An orange light flickered through the cracks of the workshop wall. Maren grabbed the iron claw hammer and stepped outside. 2 figures stood beside the lumber stack. Elias held a torch. Silas held a second one but had not lit it. For a second Maren was too stunned to move. Then Elias pressed the flame to a pile of cedar offcuts. Fire caught with a dry pop. What are you doing? Maren shouted. Silas spun. Elias laughed, though the sound was brittle. Taking back what's ours. You sold it. We sold dirt. Not all this. He waved the torch toward the house. He made it worth something. Maren looked at the stack of seasoned boards only a few feet from the flame. The night wind was rising. One spark could take the workshop, then the roof, then the dry grass around the ridge. She did not have time to argue. Beside the plaster trough sat 2 galvanized buckets of slaked lime and sand mixture. Maren dropped the hammer, seized one bucket with both hands, and ran. Elias saw her too late. She swung the bucket. White powder burst across him, the flame and the burning scraps. The fire died under a choking cloud. Silas stumbled backward, coughing. Elias cursed and wiped at his eyes, which only spread the wet lime across his face. Don't rub it, Maren said automatically. He glared at her through streaming eyes. You, don't rub it unless you want to lose skin. Footsteps came from the dark. Tali appeared from behind the workshop carrying no weapon. He took in the dead fire, the empty bucket, the torches, and Maren standing between her brothers and the lumber. His expression became very still. Silas dropped his torch. We were just. Tali picked up a 4-foot length of pine from the ground. Silas stopped talking. Tali carried the board to the stack and placed it squarely on top. Then he looked at Elias. Pick up the rest. Elias blinked through tears. What? You threw lumber into the dirt. You will stack it. You think I'm going to work for you? No. Tali pointed at the road. You can stack it here or explain the torches to Marshal Gentry before sunrise. Silas whispered, Elias. Elias's face twisted. Maren expected him to reach for his pistol. Instead, he kicked a board. Tali said, that one first. For the next 3 hours, Maren watched her brothers carry lumber. Tali made them align each stack with blocking between layers so air could pass through. When Elias threw a board down crooked, Tali pointed at it until he fixed it. Silas developed blisters before the first hour ended. Elias's breathing turned ragged. Maren brought a basin of clean water for their eyes, not because she forgave them, but because lime could blind a man and she did not want that on her conscience. Silas washed in silence. Elias refused until the burning became too strong. Near dawn, he sat on a log rubbing his palms. I never knew boards weighed this much, Silas muttered. Maren heard him. That was always the problem. He looked at her. For the first time in months, there was something like shame in his face. Elias heard too. His shame became anger. You think you're better than us now? Maren leaned against the porch post. No. Then what? I think I finally know what I can carry. Elias spat into the dust. When the wood was stacked and the first gray light touched the eastern sky, Tali stepped aside. Go. Silas left immediately. Elias lingered. He looked at the house, then at Maren. You'll regret choosing him over blood. Maren's hand rested on the porch rail she had shaped herself. I did not choose him over you. Elias waited. I chose not to go down with you. He flinched as if struck. Then he followed Silas down the trail. Maren stood until they vanished. She was shaking. Only then did she notice. Tali came beside her. You handled the fire. I nearly threw lime in my own face. But you did not. I wanted you to come sooner. I was behind the workshop. I know. He looked at her. Maren looked back. You waited. Yes. Why? Because you were already moving. She did not know whether to be angry or grateful. Tali picked up the iron claw hammer where she had dropped it. He held it out to her. You did not need this tonight. Maren took it. No, but keep it close anyway. She slid the hammer through her belt. The sun cleared the ridge. Behind them the house stood untouched by flame. Inside, the east window caught the first light and threw it across the charcoal lines of Maren's kitchen. Winter announced itself in small ways before the first frost came. Morning water formed a skin of ice in the bucket. The mare's breath showed white at the hitching rail. At night, the boards contracted with soft ticks that traveled through the rooms like someone walking carefully in another part of the house. The hearth was finished just before the temperature dropped for good. Maren had carried half the stone herself from the creek bed below the ridge. The pieces were irregular, gray on the outside and blue-black where Tali split them. He taught her how to seat each one into mortar, so its weight settled downward instead of pushing sideways. The first time they lit a fire, Maren knelt in front of the opening with her hands clasped between her knees. A twist of cedar shaving caught, then another. A small orange flame licked up through the kindling. Smoke rose cleanly into the flue. Maren waited for it to spill back into the room. It did not. Tali stood behind her with his arms folded. Well, she asked. It draws. That is all you have to say? What else should fire do? Maren threw a cedar shaving at him. That evening they ate beans, salt pork, and bread at the heavy oak table Tali had built. The room still lacked finished trim, and a blanket covered the doorway to the hall, but the roof was tight. Glass held back the wind. Fire warmed the stones beneath Maren's boots. She had eaten better meals in the old kitchen. Before her father died, when there was money for sugar and apples, and her mother still made dumplings on Sundays, none had tasted as safe. The following morning, Maren found a small cedar box on the workbench. It was too finely made to be scrap. The lid fitted without hinges. The dovetails were so tight she had to look twice to see the joint. Tali was sharpening a plain iron near the window. What is this? He nodded toward the box. Open it. Inside lay 4 chisels on a bed of soft hide. The ash handles were smooth, shaped for a smaller hand than Tali's. The steel edges reflected the cold morning light. Maren touched the narrowest one with one fingertip. These are new. Yes. They are expensive. Yes. I did not ask for them. No. She looked at him. Tali set down the whetstone. An apprentice borrows tools. Maren waited. A builder owns the edge she trusts. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She picked up the smallest chisel. It balanced perfectly against the web of her thumb. Are you saying I'm done being an apprentice? No. Maren frowned. You still ruin too much wood, she laughed despite herself. Tali's expression softened. But you no longer need permission to call yourself a carpenter. Maren looked down at the steel. For most of her life, tools had belonged to men. Her father's hammer, Elias's plow, Silas's saddle gear. Even when she used them, they returned to someone else's peg. These chisels had been shaped for her hand. She turned the box over and saw a small hawk burned into the bottom. Tali's maker's mark. Below it was an empty space. For what? She asked. Your mark. I don't have one. You will. Maren closed the box carefully. I'll keep them sharp. That is expected. I'll use them well. That matters more. Outside, frost silvered the sagebrush. Inside, the new fire had left a faint warmth in the stones. Maren carried the box to her bench and placed it beside her father's iron claw hammer. For the first time, the tools of her past and the tools of her future sat side by side, neither one canceling the other. The legal notice arrived on a morning cold enough to make the pump handle stick to bare skin. Maren was on the porch, fitting a latch to the front door when Marshal Wade Gentry rode into the yard. Frost still clung to the shaded side of the sagebrush. His horse's hooves broke the thin crust on the ground with small crunches. Gentry did not call out. That told her enough. He dismounted, took off one glove with his teeth, and pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. Morning. Doesn't look like one. No. Tali came from the workshop carrying a square. Gentry looked from him to Maren and back again. I have an order from Judge Mercer. Maren held out her hand. The paper was thick and official, covered in a clerk's careful script. Elias and Silas Van Zandt were petitioning the territorial court to void the sale. They claimed they had been intoxicated beyond reason, pressured by creditors, and manipulated by a buyer who knew the unfinished house and surrounding land would increase sharply in value once the Northern Rail Survey was completed. Maren read the page twice. "They knew about the rail survey?" she asked. Gentry rubbed his mustache. "Everyone in a saloon knows about every railroad that might come within 200 miles. Is it coming? Surveyors are looking at routes, so now they want the land back. That seems to be the shape of it." Tali had not moved. Maren turned to him. His face looked normal at first. Then she noticed the square in his hand. It was trembling, only slightly, enough. Gentry said, "Hearing is tomorrow morning. Until then, no transfer, no sale, no destruction of property. I'd advise both of you to keep things quiet." Maren gave a short laugh. "Tell my brothers. I have. Did they listen?" Gentry put his glove back on. "They heard me." He mounted and left. Maren stood on the porch, holding the notice. The front door latch rested unfinished beside her. When she turned, Tali was walking into the workshop. She followed. He placed the square on the bench too hard. Then he opened the tool chest. "Tali." He pulled out a roll of buckskin. "What are you doing?" He began wrapping the spirit level. Maren stared. "You are packing." "Yes." "The hearing is tomorrow." "Yes." "And you are leaving today?" He lifted 2 planes from the bench and set them in the chest. Maren stepped between him and the saw rack. "No." Tali stopped. No. You do not decide where I go. And you do not get to teach me for months that crooked work must be pulled apart and rebuilt, then run because a clerk folded paper." His eyes hardened. "You think this is a crooked nail?" "I think it is a hearing. I have been to hearings." "So have I." "No." The word came sharper than anything he had ever said to her. "You have stood in rooms where your name mattered before you opened your mouth. I have stood in rooms where mine ended the argument before it began." Maren felt the heat rise into her face. Tali turned away. He wrapped the level tighter. "My uncle had tax receipts," he said. "My mother's cousin had a contract. A man I worked for in Tucson had a lease signed by 3 witnesses. When someone wanted what they had, the words changed. Valid became uncertain. Owned became occupied. Payment became consideration pending review. I know how ink behaves when men decide the answer first." Maren looked at the tool chest. For the first time since she had known him, Tali seemed tired in a way sleep could not fix. Not weak, used up. She took the spirit level from his hands. He let her. "What happens if you leave?" "I find work." "Where?" "Somewhere." "And the house?" He looked past her toward the doorway. "The house stands. For who?" "Silence." Maren set the level on the bench. "You told me a builder must know where she stands." Tali's jaw tightened. "Well, I know." She lifted the legal notice. "I stand in that courtroom tomorrow." He said nothing. "I stand there even if you do not." She walked out before her voice could break. For the rest of the day, Tali did not pack another tool. He also did not work. Maren had never seen him spend daylight without making something. He sat on the porch step and sharpened the same knife twice, then stopped and stared at the valley. Near sunset, she took the deed from him. He handed it over without argument. Maren carried it into the master bedroom. One floorboard near the north window had been left loose because they had planned to make a small compartment beneath it. Tali said every house needed a place for things the world should not find easily. Maren pried up the board. Inside the narrow hollow she placed the deed, the original blueprints, a copy of her wage ledger, and the receipt from the trading post showing the final payment to Elias and Silas. Then she added 1 bent nail from the wall she had dismantled on her first day as an apprentice. She did not know why. Perhaps because paper could say anything, the nail could not. She replaced the board and drove 2 finishing nails at a shallow angle, careful to leave the heads accessible. Tap, tap. The sound steadied her breathing. That night they ate little. Tali slept in the workshop. Maren lay awake in her nearly finished bedroom beneath the quilt she had bought secondhand in town. The house had doors now, glass, a roof, a chimney that drew clean. It should have felt secure. Instead, every gust against the siding sounded like someone trying a lock. Before dawn, Tali knocked once on her doorframe. Maren opened her eyes. He stood in the hall wearing his better shirt, the dark one with only 1 patch at the elbow. "You going?" she asked. "Yes." She sat up. Tali placed her cedar chisel box on the small table beside the bed. "What is that for?" "Nothing. You carried it from the workshop." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at the box. So you remember what you are when they tell you what they think you are. Maren swung her feet to the floor. They left for San Pedro as the eastern sky turned pale. The town hall smelled of damp wool, tobacco, stove ash, and ink. Every bench was full. Maren recognized people who had not visited the ridge once in 5 years. Ranchers, shopkeepers, women from church, men who had played cards with Elias and Silas. Beatrice Thorne sat near the rear, gloved hands folded over a black handbag. Elias and Silas occupied the front bench. They had cleaned up for court. Elias wore a black coat that pulled across his stomach. Silas's hair had been combed flat with too much oil. When Maren entered, Elias looked at her hands. The calluses were visible even after washing. He smiled in a way that made her skin crawl. Tali stood near the back wall rather than sit. Judge Mercer entered through a side door carrying a stack of papers. He was a narrow man with silver spectacles and a habit of pressing his lips together before speaking. The clerk called the case. Elias's attorney rose first. He spoke for almost 20 minutes. He described 2 grieving sons overwhelmed by debt after their father's death. He described a predatory buyer who recognized their weakness. He described ancestral land sold for a fraction of its potential value. He used the word confusion 6 times and coercion 4. He did not mention poker once. He did not mention the bottles. He did not mention the banknote Elias had ignored for 8 months. Maren listened. When Silas was called, he swore that Tali had appeared at the trading post while they were desperate and offered immediate money before they understood what they were signing. Gentry's brow lowered. The trading post clerk shifted in his seat. Elias testified next. He was better at lying because he believed pieces of his own lies while speaking them. Our father meant that land to remain with his children, he said. We were not ourselves after he passed. Judge Mercer looked over his spectacles. Your father died 3 years before the sale. Elias swallowed. Grief has no calendar, Your Honor. A few people murmured approval. Maren stared at the back of his neck. She remembered that same neck bent over card tables, bent over a whiskey glass, bent away from every bill she placed in front of him. When Maren's name was called, the room changed. Not much. A rustle, a cough, someone shifting to see better. She walked to the front. The clerk asked her to swear the truth. She did. Elias's attorney approached. Miss Van Zandt, you were living on the property at the time of sale? Yes. Were you consulted? No. So Mr. Nanton acquired a property occupied by a woman who had not consented to the transaction? Yes. Elias smiled. The attorney turned toward the judge. There. But he did not know I was there, Maren said. The attorney stopped. Please answer only the question asked. I did. Judge Mercer hid something that might have been amusement. The attorney continued. You were understandably distraught, yes. And you attempted to seize the deed from Mr. Nanton? Yes. And he refused to return it? Yes. And after that you remained on his property? Yes. Working for him, with him. The attorney looked toward the benches. You expect this court to believe that after your family home was taken from you, you voluntarily entered the buyer's service? I entered an apprenticeship. Because he offered you shelter? Because I asked him. Because you had nowhere else to go. That helped me make the decision quickly. A few people laughed. The attorney frowned. Miss Van Zandt, would you describe your emotional state at the time as stable? Maren looked at Judge Mercer. Which time? The days after the sale? No. Yet you are asking this court to rely on your judgment about whether your brothers were competent? Maren finally looked at Elias. I do not need to judge what was inside their heads. I watched what they did. The attorney raised a hand. We are discussing the signing. So am I. Judge Mercer leaned forward. Explain. The attorney opened his mouth. The judge said, let her. Maren rested her hands on the rail. My brothers were behind on the banknote because they spent money at the Gilded Pony. They owed Gentry at the trading post because they bought feed on credit, then sold part of the feed to cover gambling losses. They knew the house was unfinished. They knew winter was coming. They knew the roof lumber had been purchased with borrowed money. Elias showed me the bank letter 2 weeks before the sale and said he would find money. Elias shifted. Maren continued. He found it by selling the ridge. The attorney said, financial distress can impair judgment. It can. Alcohol can impair judgment. Yes, then you agree, no? A small silence opened. Maren said they were drinking when they signed. They were also drinking when they bought the feed. They were drinking when they borrowed for lumber. They were drinking when Elias tried to finish a wall and split 6 cedar studs because he would not drill pilot holes. If every choice they regret becomes invalid because they had whiskey in them, you may have to unwind half their adult lives. A louder murmur moved through the room. Elias's face turned red. Maren reached into her work bag. She had brought 3 pieces of evidence. The first was a copy of the trading post receipt showing the initial payment and the final balance. The second was her father's old account book, where he had recorded ownership shares before his death. The third was a short length of split cedar. The attorney stared at the wood. "What is that?" "One of the studs Elias installed. This is a court, not a carpenter's shop." "No," Maren said. "That is why you keep calling bad judgment madness." Judge Mercer took off his spectacles. Maren placed the split cedar on the table. "My brothers knew what they were selling. They sold it because they did not want the work and needed the money. After the house became valuable, they wanted the choice undone." The judge looked at Elias. Elias stood abruptly. "She has been turned against us." "Sit down," Judge Mercer said. Elias did not. "That man has had her alone on that ridge for months. You think she talks like this because of herself?" Maren felt the old fear rise in her body. Her stomach tightened. Her shoulders wanted to pull inward. She looked down at her hands. A thin line of sawdust still hid beneath one fingernail despite scrubbing. Tali's words from dawn came back to her. "Remember what you are when they tell you what they think you are." Maren looked up. "I talk like this because for the first time you cannot interrupt me at our kitchen table." The room went silent. Elias stared. Maren continued before he could answer. "You sold the land. Then you came back for father's tools. Then you brought the marshal and told him I was being held. Then you tried to burn the lumber." Gasps broke out behind her. Gentry stepped away from the wall. Judge Mercer's face changed. "What?" Elias shouted. "That is a lie." Silas looked at the floor. Maren turned toward him. "Silas." He would not look at her. "Tell him." Elias hissed. "Don't." Judge Mercer struck the desk once with his gavel. "Mr. Silas Van Zandt." Silas looked up slowly. His face had gone gray. "Did you attempt to burn materials on the disputed property?" Silas swallowed. "No, sir." Maren said nothing. Judge Mercer watched him. Gentry watched him. The whole room waited. Silas's mouth opened again. "I mean, we went there." Elias closed his eyes. Silas rubbed both hands on his trousers. "Elias had a torch. I had one too. Mine wasn't lit." The attorney sat down. Judge Mercer's voice became very quiet. "Why?" Silas looked at his brother. Elias stared straight ahead. Silas whispered, "Because it looked better than when we had it." There it was. Not a grand confession, not repentance, just the ugly little truth. Judge Mercer called a recess. The crowd spilled outside into the cold sunlight. Maren remained inside. Her knees were shaking. Tali came to her but stopped 2 steps away. "You did well. I nearly forgot how to speak, but you did not. I wanted to hit Elias with the cedar. That would have weakened the evidence." Maren laughed once, breathlessly. Tali's mouth moved at the corner. Then his expression grew serious. "I was wrong yesterday." She looked at him. "About leaving?" "Yes, that is not enough of an apology." "No, what else?" "I was wrong to think losing before meant losing again was wisdom." Maren studied him. "That is better." Judge Mercer returned after less than half an hour. His decision was plain. The sale had been witnessed, paid in full, and followed by conduct showing both brothers understood it. They accepted the money, left the property, returned later seeking separate ownership of tools rather than claiming the entire sale invalid, then attempted to damage improvements after learning the property had become more valuable. The deed stood. The petition was dismissed. Elias and Silas were ordered to stay away from the property except by written permission, while Gentry investigated the attempted burning. The gavel fell. Maren did not feel triumph. She felt tired, so tired that when she stepped outside the sunlight seemed too bright. Elias pushed past her on the steps. "You think this is over?" he whispered. Maren looked at him. "Yes." The certainty of her answer seemed to disturb him more than anger would have. Silas came behind, eyes lowered. For 1 second he paused. "I'm sorry," he said so quietly she almost missed it. Maren's throat tightened. She did not forgive him. She also did not punish him with words. "Go," she said. Silas went. The walk home took 2 hours. Tali led the mare so they could walk together. Neither spoke for the first mile. Maren kicked a stone off the road. "I thought winning would feel larger." Tali nodded. "It usually feels like paperwork." She looked at him. "You have a joke now?" "No." "That was a joke." "No." She smiled. When the house came into view, its cedar walls caught the late sun. Maren stopped on the trail. For months she had seen every flaw, unfinished trim, an uneven patch of stain, a shutter that still needed a second hinge. From the road, none of those things mattered. It looked like a home. Tali stood beside her. Maren said, "You almost left it." "Yes. I am going to remind you of that for years." "I expected that." They walked the rest of the way in silence. 2 mornings later, Tali hitched the mare before dawn and rode to town alone. He returned after noon with a flat leather folder tucked inside his coat. Maren was trimming the pantry shelves. "What did you buy?" "Nothing. You are a poor liar." "I did not buy anything." He set the folder on the kitchen table. Inside was a new document bearing the territorial seal. Maren read the first line. Then she read it again. Her name appeared beside Tali's as equal owner of the ridge, the house, the workshop site, the spring rights, and all fixed improvements. She looked up. "What did you do?" "Recorded a partnership deed." "I can read that." "Yes." "Why?" Tali pulled out a chair and sat. The movement made him look suddenly uncertain, which was so rare that Maren did not know what to do with it. He folded his hands. "I bought the land." "Yes, you built the house. So did you. You built your part. That is not how houses work. It is how ownership should." Maren's eyes moved over the paper. There was no condition tied to employment, no mention of marriage, no debt to repay, no clause allowing him to remove her name. "You paid for this." "Filing fee, I mean the land, yes." "And you are putting half in my name." "Yes. Why?" Tali looked toward the east window. Winter light lay across the kitchen floor exactly where she had wanted it. "Your brothers thought a name made them owners," he said. "They were wrong. I do not want to make the same mistake in a different direction." Maren's vision blurred. She hated that. She blinked hard. Tali pretended not to notice. "The house is not finished," she said. "No, the porch rail still needs oil. Yes, the north shutter sticks. Yes. You made a spelling error in my middle name." Tali's head snapped toward the deed. Maren laughed through the tears she had failed to stop. "I did not." "No," she said. "You did not." Tali exhaled. Maren signed. Her hand did not shake. Afterward, she placed the new deed beside the old one in the hidden compartment beneath the master bedroom floor. The bent nail stayed with them. The next weeks were quieter. Gentry questioned Elias and Silas about the fire. No formal charges followed because the damage had been small and witnesses were limited, but the marshal made their presence unwelcome in San Pedro. Creditors, newly confident that the land would not be returned, became less patient as well. The brothers began selling what little they had left. Maren heard this from Beatrice Thorne, who arrived one afternoon in a wagon with a folded quilt. The widow climbed down slowly, carrying the bundle against her chest. She looked up at the finished roof. "Well," she said. Maren waited. Beatrice walked to the porch and ran her fingertips along the carved door frame. Tali was in the yard fitting a new handle to a draw knife. The widow glanced at him. "I came to see whether the marshal exaggerated. He usually does not." "No, that is one of his less charming qualities." She tested the door by opening and closing it. It moved without scraping. "My Henry hung our front door in 3 hours," she said. Maren did not know what answer was expected. Beatrice continued. "Every wet spring it swells until I have to shoulder it like a drunk at closing time." Maren smiled. The widow looked at the threshold, the joints, the porch posts. "This will stand." Tali said from the yard, "That is the intention." Beatrice's mouth twitched. She held the bundle out to Maren. Inside was a heavy quilt made in a log cabin pattern. Dark blue, brown rust, faded yellow, and pieces of old red cloth. "My sister and I made it before she went east." Beatrice said, "Too heavy for my bed now." Maren touched a seam. The stitches were tiny and even. "It is beautiful. It is warm. Beauty is less dependable." Maren looked at the older woman. Beatrice adjusted her gloves. "I spoke carelessly the last time I came here, yes." The widow looked surprised by the lack of rescue offered. Maren waited. Beatrice sighed. "I thought I was warning you. You were warning me. I was also assuming things I had not earned the right to assume." Maren looked toward Tali. He had returned to his draw knife and was giving them the privacy of apparent inattention. Beatrice said, "Your house is better built than mine." "That is the apology?" "It is as close as you are likely to get before supper." Maren smiled. "Then I accept the quilt." Beatrice nodded, relieved. Before leaving, she spoke to Tali directly. "Carpenter." He looked up. "My pantry door drags." "Yes? What would you charge to fix it?" Tali named a price, squinted. "Too much. It includes the distance. I will send my hired boy for you." "Then less. Tuesday. Afternoon." She climbed into the wagon. Maren watched her leave. "That," she said, "may be the closest thing to a civic ceremony you will ever get." Tali inspected the draw knife handle. "Her door probably drags because the hinge screws are loose." You could have said that. Then I would lose the job. Maren stared at him. Tali looked up, perfectly serious. She burst out laughing. By the time snow dusted the upper peaks, the house was nearly finished. They stained the outer cedar with boiled linseed oil. The work was slow and sticky. Maren's sleeves smelled of turpentine for days. The raw boards deepened from pale gold to warm brown as they drank the oil. At sunset, the whole house seemed to glow. They stood in the yard with brushes in hand, both too tired to speak. Tali finally said, "We missed a place." Maren groaned. "Where?" He pointed to a strip under the eave too high to see from where she stood. "You are lying." "Yes." She turned slowly. "You admit it?" "Yes." "Why?" "You look too satisfied." Maren dipped her brush in the bucket and flicked a line of oil at him. It struck his sleeve. Tali stared at the stain. Maren took one step backward. "No." He dipped 2 fingers into the bucket. "Tali," she ran. He caught her near the pump and put one oily thumbprint on her cheek. Maren gasped as if mortally insulted. Then she put both stained hands against the front of his shirt. They stood there breathing hard, inches apart. The laughter faded first. The yard grew very quiet. Tali looked at the amber streak on her cheek. Maren looked at the line of his mouth. He lifted one hand slowly, giving her time to move. She did not. His fingers touched the side of her face, just below the stain. Maren's heart beat so hard it felt foolish. Tali lowered his forehead to hers. No declaration came, no promise. Only the smell of castor oil, cold air, sweat, and wood smoke from the kitchen chimney. Maren closed her eyes. When he kissed her, it was brief and careful. She caught the front of his shirt before he could step away and kissed him again. Afterward, Tali looked toward the house. "We should clean the brushes." Maren laughed into his shoulder. "You are impossible. Oil ruins bristles." "Of course it does." Their life did not change suddenly after that. The next morning, Tali still made her recut a poorly fitted drawer front. Maren still told him his coffee could dissolve horseshoes. They still disagreed about whether the workshop needed a second stove, but small things shifted. His coat appeared beside hers on the peg near the kitchen door. Her cup sat next to his at the workbench. At night, when one of them finished late, the other left a lamp burning near the porch. The house absorbed the changes without ceremony. Maren liked that. Then Elias and Silas came back one final time. It happened after midnight. Maren woke to a floorboard creak, not the ordinary settling tick of cold cedar, a specific groan from the master bedroom. She opened her eyes in darkness. Beside the bed, moonlight silvered the head of the iron claw hammer. Tali had stayed late in the workshop working on Beatrice's pantry door and had fallen asleep there. Maren could have called him. She did not. She slid out of bed and picked up the hammer. The hall was blue with moonlight. Another scrape came from the bedroom, metal against wood. Maren stepped to the doorway. 2 men knelt near the north window. Elias had pried up the secret floorboard. Silas held a lantern turned low. For one strange second, Maren was more offended by the splintered edge of the board than by the theft itself. They had damaged a joint she had fitted by hand. "I would stop," she said. Silas jerked so violently the lantern almost fell. Elias hit his head on the bed frame and swore. Maren stood in the doorway with the hammer hanging loosely at her side. Elias recovered first. "You hit it? Yes? The deed? Yes? Give it to us." "No." His face looked gaunt in the lantern light. "We know about the railroad. So does everyone. The route will come through the lower valley. This land will be worth 10 times what he paid. Maybe, he knew. No, you cannot know that. I can." He tried not to buy the land twice. Elias stared at her. Silas whispered, "What?" Maren looked at him. "You never told him?" Silas's mouth hardened. "It does not matter. It matters to me. We were desperate. You were. We are family." Maren's grip tightened around the hammer, but her voice remained calm. "That sentence has done a lot of work for you." Elias stepped toward her. "You think this carpenter made you something you weren't?" "No. He turned you against us." "No. He gave you our land." "No." Elias's face twisted. "Then what did he do?" Maren looked past him at the open floorboard. "He gave me work. I did the rest." The words surprised her with how simple they felt. Silas stared at the hammer. "Maren," he said, "we just need the paper." "You already had paper. You signed it." "We can fix this." "No. We can sell before the railroad comes." "Split it 3 ways." "No. You would have money." Maren looked around the room. The walls were plastered. The window trim was walnut. Beatrice's quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Her chisel box sat on a shelf. Her father's hammer rested in her hand. "I have a house." Elias laughed bitterly. "A house can burn." Maren's body went still. Silas turned toward him. "Elias." Elias seemed to realize what he had said only after it was in the room. Maren lifted the hammer, not over her shoulder, just enough for the moonlight to catch the iron. "If you touch one more board," she said, "I will not aim for a nail." Silas backed toward the window. Elias did not. He looked at his sister and searched for the girl who used to lower her voice when he was angry. She was not there. From the hall behind Maren came a quiet footstep. Tali had arrived. He wore no boots, only trousers and a shirt half-buttoned. He carried nothing. Elias glanced at him. Tali did not move past Maren, that mattered. He did not put himself between her and the threat. He stood behind her, close enough to help if needed, far enough to leave the choice in her hands. Silas climbed through the open window. Elias looked at the deed in the floor cavity, then at Maren, then at Tali. "You'll lose it someday," he said. Maren lowered the hammer slightly. "Maybe." The answer confused him. She continued, "Storm, fire, taxes, bad harvest. Anything can be lost. That is why I learned how to build." Elias had no reply. He climbed out the window after Silas. Tali waited until hoofbeats faded before entering the room. Maren sat on the bed. Her hands began to shake. Tali crouched in front of the damaged board. "Ugly pry mark," he said. Maren let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "That is what you notice?" "I notice your hands too." She looked down. They were trembling badly. Tali took the hammer from her and set it aside. Then he held out his hands, palms up. Maren placed hers in them. He waited until the shaking eased. "I could have called you." She said, "Yes, I did not. I know. Was that stupid?" Tali considered. "Yes." Maren gave him an offended look. "It was also yours to face. That does not make the first part better." "No." He squeezed her fingers. "They repaired the floorboard before breakfast." Maren insisted. Tali wanted to wait until the light was better, but she could not bear seeing the cavity open. They glued the splinter, reset the edge, and replaced the finishing nails. Then Tali did something she did not expect. He took the old deed and the partnership deed out of the compartment. "What are you doing?" "Changing where we keep them. Because they found the hiding place." "Yes." He carried the papers to the kitchen table. Maren followed. Tali laid them flat and smoothed the creases. "We hide tools from thieves," he said. "We do not have to hide ownership from family." "They are thieves, yes." He pointed to the partnership deed, "but this should be seen." 2 weeks later, a simple frame hung inside the front hall. Behind glass was a certified copy of the partnership deed with both names clearly visible. The original remained locked in Gentry's records box at the town office. Maren liked the arrangement. Nothing beneath the floor could rot from damp, nothing could be pried up at night, and every person who crossed the threshold had to pass the names of both owners. Elias and Silas did not return. In January, they sold their last horses. By February, word spread that they were leaving San Pedro by stage. Maren did not plan to watch. Then the stage route passed below the ridge. On the same afternoon, she and Tali finished the porch railing. The last nail waited at the corner post. Tali held it between 2 fingers. Maren stood beside him with her father's hammer. The winter sun was low and bright. Snow shone on the distant mountains, but the ridge itself was dry. Tali set the nail. Maren raised the hammer. He raised his own. They had done this before on long boards when one strike needed answering from the other end. No words were necessary. They swung together. The 2 hammers struck almost at the same instant. The nail drove flush. The crack of iron against ironwood traveled over the ridge. Maren lowered her arm. A stagecoach moved along the valley road. She could not see faces at that distance. She did not need to. A gray cloud of dust followed the coach toward the southern trail. Tali rested his hammer on the railing. "They will not look back," he said. Maren watched until the coach became a small moving dot. "I used to want them to, and now I want them to keep going." Tali nodded. The stage vanished beyond a rise. Maren waited for grief. Some came. It was not grief for the men they had become. It was for the boys she remembered before cards and debt made every promise negotiable. Silas at 10, asleep with a puppy under his coat. Elias at 17, carrying their mother across the creek when her ankle swelled. Their father teaching all 3 children to set fence posts in a straight line. Those memories remained true, even if later truths were uglier. Maren had learned enough carpentry by then to know a damaged section did not require pretending the whole board had always been rotten. She let herself mourn what had been good. Then she went inside. That winter was the first time the house held a full season. On the shortest morning of the year, Tali woke Maren before sunrise. He said only, "Come." They stood in the front hall wrapped in blankets. breath faintly visible in the cold air. The horizon brightened. A narrow beam of sunlight appeared through the notch in the western-facing mountain line, angled by the house's 3-degree shift and the eastern approach of dawn. It entered through the front opening and stretched across the floor. Slowly, almost silently, the light touched the center stone of the hearth. Maren looked at Tali. He was watching the light, not her. My father would have complained about the 3 degrees, she said. Probably. Then he would have pretended it was his idea. Probably. Maren slipped her hand into Tali's. His fingers closed around hers. The beam of sunlight warmed the stone for less than 10 minutes before moving on. It was enough. Spring brought work. Beatrice Thorne's pantry door led to a barn repair for her neighbor. The barn repair led to a set of cabinets for the doctor. A rancher from 12 miles west hired Tali and Maren to rebuild a collapsed porch. Then the hotel ordered 6 new bedroom doors after Maren demonstrated that the old ones warped because the frames had been hung without allowance for seasonal swelling. The workshop became crowded. They added racks for lumber and a second bench. Maren burned a small mark into the underside of her first finished cabinet, a simple line drawing of a mountain with a square at its base. Tali turned it over. Your mark? Yes, why a square? Because someone has to keep your hawk level. He stared at her. She smiled. Tali shook his head and put the cabinet back upright. They married the following autumn. There was no grand church ceremony. Maren did not want one, and Tali had no interest in performing their life for a town that had once debated whether he deserved to own the dirt under his boots. Marshal Gentry signed as witness. Beatrice brought a cake dense enough to injure a man if dropped from a height. Miller supplied coffee and charged too much for it. 3 ranch families came. So did 2 Apache cousins of Tali's who had traveled from the south. They stood on the porch they had built together. Maren wore a plain blue dress Beatrice had altered. Tali wore a dark coat that fit badly across his shoulders, because he refused to let the tailor add another day to the job. When asked for rings, Tali produced 2 narrow bands of silver. Inside Maren's was engraved a tiny level bubble. She looked at him. You planned that? Yes, without asking. Yes, 3 degrees again. Possibly. She smiled and put the ring on. Their marriage did not turn the house into a fairy tale. Roofs still needed patching. Work slowed in bad months. One summer the spring dropped so low they hauled water from the lower wash. Another winter, a chimney cap tore loose in a gale, and Tali climbed onto the roof while Maren shouted that if he died, she would bring him back only to kill him again. They argued about money. They argued about apprentices. They argued about whether a client who refused to pay on time should receive his repaired door before settling the account. Maren believed no. Tali believed also no, but preferred to pretend the argument had 2 sides. They learned how to disagree without threatening the foundation beneath each other. That took practice too. Their daughter was born in the room Maren had once defended with a hammer. They named her Alani. The labor began during a summer thunderstorm. Rain struck the roof so hard. Maren laughed between pains at the memory of the canvas, nearly carrying her into the yard years before. Beatrice attended the birth with the stern efficiency of a field commander. Tali spent hours outside the bedroom, wearing a path into the hall floor, until Beatrice opened the door and ordered him to either come in or stop making the house nervous. He came in. When the baby finally cried, Tali sat down abruptly in the chair beside the bed. Maren had never seen his face lose all defenses at once. He held Alani as if she were the most delicate piece of joinery ever made, and he had forgotten every skill he possessed. She is not going to break, Maren whispered. I know. You are holding your breath. I know. Breathe. He did. Alani grew up around wood shavings. As a toddler, she collected curled plane ribbons and wore them as bracelets. At 4, she could identify cedar by smell. At 6, she stole Maren's smallest chisel and tried to carve a horse into the underside of the kitchen table. Maren found her halfway through. The horse looked like a potato with legs. What are you doing? Alani froze. Tali appeared in the doorway. His eyes dropped to the damaged table. Maren waited for him to speak. He crouched beside their daughter. Wrong tool, he said. Maren stared at him. Alani looked hopeful. Tali took the chisel and examined the edge. Also dull. Maren put both hands over her face. You are not encouraging this. No. You are teaching her how to do it better. She already decided to carve the table. Tali. Alani giggled. The table kept the ugly horse for 20 years. Maren refused to sand it away. The town changed slowly around them. The railroad never crossed the lower valley after all. The survey shifted north, then west, then disappeared into some other argument of money and maps. The great fortune Elias imagined never materialized. Maren learned this without pleasure. It was simply another reminder that her brothers had nearly destroyed themselves chasing value that did not yet exist while ignoring what stood beneath their hands. Miller retired and sold the store to his nephew, who cared more about cash than ancestry, and therefore treated everyone with a refreshingly equal kind of impatience. Marshall Gentry grew stiff in the knees and eventually surrendered his badge to a younger man. Beatrice Thorne's pantry door never dragged again. She mentioned this fact whenever anyone discussed Tali's work, usually as if she had discovered his talent personally. The workshop expanded twice. They trained young people who had few other places to go. A ranch boy with a damaged leg who could not ride long hours. A widow who wanted to make furniture rather than take in washing. An Apache teenager whose family knew Tali's cousins. A Mexican blacksmith's daughter with a gift for measuring curves by eye. Maren was harder on apprentices than Tali. This became a subject of general agreement. "You are cruel," Tali told her one afternoon after she made a boy reset the same hinge for the 4th time. "You made me pull an entire wall of nails. That wall was bad, so was his hinge. It closed." It complained. Tali opened and shut the small cabinet door. It gave a faint squeak. Maren crossed her arms. He looked at the apprentice, reset it. Maren smiled. Years passed in repairs, meals, winters, births, funerals, orders, droughts, and ordinary evenings. The dramatic moments became stories they told less often than expected. The fire became that night Elias learned what lumber weighs. The courtroom became the day Maren took a split stud to the judge. The storm became the reason we always tie the western canvas first. Pain lost some of its sharpness when absorbed into useful memory. 20 years after the sale, the house had silvered beneath the Arizona sun. The cedar no longer glowed honey brown except beneath the eaves where weather could not reach. The porch steps carried shallow hollows from thousands of boots. The kitchen table bore Alani's carved potato horse and 2 burn marks from hot pans. Nothing was perfect. Everything important held. On a late autumn afternoon, Maren stood on the porch watching Alani check a long beam on sawhorses. Her daughter was 19 now, lean and steady, with Tali's dark eyes and Maren's habit of biting the inside of her cheek when concentrating. She placed the old cedar spirit level on the beam. The brass ends were scratched. The glass vial remained clear. Alani crouched to read the bubble. Left side is high. Tali worked at the other end of the yard, shaping a ridgepole with a draw knife. Gray had entered his hair at the temples. He did not look up. "How much?" he called. Alani squinted. "An eighth," Maren said. "Less." Alani checked again. 16th. Tali stopped cutting. "Which?" Alani sighed. "A hair over a 16th. Maren smiled. Tali resumed the draw knife. "Then say what it is, not what you wish it were." Alani rolled her eyes. "You both say that, because you keep needing to hear it," Maren said. Her daughter lifted one end of the beam and slipped in a shaving. The bubble centered. Maren went into the house for coffee. The framed partnership deed still hung in the hall. Time had yellowed the paper slightly. Tali's name and hers remained dark enough to read. Below it, on a narrow shelf, rested the bent nail from the original wall. Visitors sometimes ask why they displayed a rusty nail beneath a legal document. Maren never gave the same answer twice. Sometimes she said it was to remind clients what poor workmanship cost. Sometimes she said it was the first thing she ever removed correctly. Once, when Alani was 12, she told her the truth. That nail was driven by somebody who thought the next person would have to live with his bad work. Alani had considered this. "And you pulled it out?" "Yes. Why keep it?" "So I remember I can." Now Maren poured 3 cups of coffee. Tali's was black. Alani's had a spoonful of sugar. Maren added a little milk to hers and carried the tray outside. The late sun lay warm across the porch. A customer's wagon had left an hour before, taking with it a walnut cradle Alani had built largely on her own. The empty space in the workshop smelled of fresh shavings and iron filings. Tali set down his draw knife and came to the porch. Alani stayed with the beam. "Coffee," Maren called. "In a minute." "You said that yesterday. The joint is almost right." Tali sat beside Maren. "Your fault," she told him. "No, she gets that from you. She gets the talking from you." Maren handed him his cup. Their hands brushed. The gesture was so ordinary now that neither paused, yet Maren still remembered the first time his fingers touched hers over a sanding block and how loud her own heart had seemed. She looked across the yard. The workshop stood where Tali had once slept on a thin blanket because buying the ridge had emptied his savings. It now held 3 benches, 2 stoves, racks of seasoned wood, cabinets of hardware, and a wall of finished tools. Her first chisel set remained in daily use. Her father's hammer had been rehung on a peg only last year after the handle finally cracked. Maren had wrapped the split with rawhide and retired it rather than replace the wood. Tali followed her gaze. "You are thinking too loudly. I was remembering when you slept under that bench. He drank coffee. You were not supposed to see that. You slept in an open workshop. I trusted your manners. That was your mistake." Tali smiled into his cup. Alani finally came up the steps and took her coffee. "Level is true." "Good," Maren said. Alani leaned against the railing. "What was this place like before the workshop?" Maren and Tali looked at each other. Their daughter knew the story, of course, but children sometimes ask questions whose answers they have heard many times because the day gives them new ears. Maren looked at the silvered siding. "Louder," she said. Alani frowned. "Louder? Not with people, with everything else. Loose boards, open rafters, wind through the walls, your uncle's arguing." Tali said bad nails. Maren nodded. "A great many bad nails." Alani sipped her coffee. "Were you scared of father?" Tali nearly choked. Maren smiled. "Yes." Alani looked delighted. "Tali said she threatened me with a hammer. I held a hammer. You held it badly. That is different." "You slept with it." Alani laughed. Maren pointed at Tali. "He came onto the property without saying hello and started measuring my walls. I owned the walls. Legally. Yes. That did not improve your manners." Alani looked between them. "So when did you know?" Maren's smile faded into something softer. "Know what? That you were staying together." Tali looked toward the valley. Maren thought of possible answers. The storm when his hand caught her arm. The glass crates when he said nothing and simply lifted the weight with her. The roof with the level between them. The night of the fire. The courthouse, the partnership deed. The kiss beside the pump with linseed oil on both their clothes. None felt entirely right. "I don't think there was one moment," she said. Tali nodded. Maren continued, "It was more like building a wall. One board looks like nothing, then another. Then one day you realize the wind is staying outside." Alani made a face. "That is very romantic." Tali said, "It is accurate. That makes it worse." They laughed. The sun dropped lower. From somewhere down the ridge came the distant rattle of a wagon. A hawk circled above the canyon, riding a current of cold air without moving its wings. Maren watched Alani return to the beam. Her daughter picked up the spirit level and carried it with both hands. Not because the tool was too heavy, because she respected it. That mattered. Tali rested his forearms on the porch railing. "Tomorrow we start the Miller barn. The nephew or the old man?" "Nephew." "Good. The old one still owes me an apology for the glass." "He is 83. He has had time." Tali shook his head. Maren leaned her shoulder against his. The house made a small sound as the evening temperature changed, a gentle tick from somewhere beneath the eaves. Once, every noise had frightened her because she thought it meant the structure was failing. Now she knew the difference between settling and breaking. That knowledge had taken years. It applied to more than wood. After supper, Alani went to the workshop to sharpen her plain iron for the next day. Tali cleaned the coffee pot. Maren walked through the house, closing shutters against the cold. She stopped in the master bedroom. Moonlight lay across the floor near the repaired board. Her brothers had pried open years ago. The patch was almost invisible unless a person knew where to look. Maren knew. She knelt and ran a finger over the grain. The wood was smooth, not untouched, repaired. There was a difference. She preferred repaired. Untouched things had never been tested. From the workshop came the steady rasp of Alani's sharpening stone. Shh. The same sound Tali's whetstone had made on the morning after Maren's brothers sold the ridge. Maren stood. In the hall, the deed hung under glass. 2 names. Below it, the bent nail. She touched the frame once as she passed. Outside, Tali had taken 2 cedar chairs onto the porch. He sat in one. The other waited beside him. Maren wrapped Beatrice's old quilt around her shoulders and sat. The fabric had faded over the years. Several patches were replacements Maren had sewn herself. 1 blue square came from Alani's childhood dress. A brown strip came from Tali's old work shirt. A pale yellow piece had once been the breadcloth Beatrice brought on her first suspicious visit. The quilt was no longer what its maker had made. It had become a record of use. Tali reached beneath the quilt and found Maren's hand. His palm was rougher than it had been 20 years before. So was hers. They watched darkness settle over the valley. The land below was divided now by more fences. New roofs shone near the road. Telegraph poles marched toward San Pedro. The territory had become a state on paper, though the wind seemed unaware. Maren thought of Elias and Silas less often these days. Occasionally a traveler brought a rumor. One brother working freight near El Paso, another seen in New Mexico, a card game, a debt, a job abandoned. Nothing certain. She never searched for them. She hoped, in the private way people hope for those they no longer allow near them, that somewhere they had finally grown tired enough to become different. Hope cost nothing if it did not require opening the door. Tali squeezed her hand. "What?" she asked. "You are thinking loudly again." "About tomorrow." Maren smiled. "Maybe." Across the yard, Ilani closed the workshop door. The latch clicked. She crossed the gravel carrying the cedar spirit level in its old felt-lined box. At the porch, she handed it to Tali. He did not take it. "Keep it tonight." Ilani blinked. "Why?" "You open tomorrow." The workshop had always been Tali's first responsibility each morning. Even after Maren became equal owner, he unlocked the doors before dawn, checked the stoves, inspected the racks, and set out the day's work. Ilani understood what he was saying. Her face changed. "Just tomorrow?" Tali looked at Maren. Maren hid a smile. "We will see if you are late." Ilani clutched the box to her chest. "I won't be." "Everyone says that at night." "I won't." She went inside carefully, carrying the level as Maren had once carried her new chisel box. Tali watched the door close. Maren leaned back in the chair. "Cruel?" she said. "What? You made her think it is only one morning." "It may be. It is not. No." Maren laughed softly. The stars came out one by one. The house behind them held the heat of the evening fire. The chimney drew clean. The doors closed square. The roof did not leak. Under the porch, foundation stones rested deep in the red earth, where Maren's father had placed the first course, and where she and Tali had corrected what needed correcting without tearing out what remained true. Maren had once believed home was something blood protected automatically. Life had taught her otherwise in harsher language than she would have chosen. Blood could sell a deed. A judge could question a signature. A town could decide who belonged before meeting them. Storms could strip canvas from rafters. Fire could run through dry cedar. Greed could come through a window at midnight. None of those things made a home impossible. They only made the work visible. Tali shifted beside her. The chair gave a familiar creak. Maren looked at the joint beneath the armrest. "You never fixed that." Tali looked down. "It is not loose. It creaks. Wood moves. You taught me that a complaint means something. It means the chair knows I am sitting in it." "That is nonsense." "Yes." Maren smiled. She pulled the quilt higher over their hands. In the workshop, a hanging tool settled against the wall with a faint metallic tap. Then everything grew still. Not empty. Not waiting for disaster. Simply still. The kind of quiet a well-built house can hold without fear. Before dawn the next morning, Maren woke to a sound she had not heard in years. A key turning in the workshop lock before Tali was out of bed. She opened her eyes. Beside her, Tali was awake too. Neither moved. The front room was dark except for a faint red glow in the hearth. Outside, gravel crunched under Ilani's boots. The workshop door opened with a low wooden sigh. Maren smiled into the darkness. Tali whispered, "Too early." "You are criticizing her for being early?" "She will light the stove badly if she is still half asleep." "You are not getting up." "I did not say I was." They listened. A lid clanged. Kindling scraped. Then came 3 quick strikes of flint and a pause. Another strike. Maren covered her mouth to keep from laughing. Tali stared at the ceiling. She packed the tinder too tight. "You cannot know that from here." "I can hear it." A moment later, the stovepipe gave a soft, warming tick. Tali's shoulders relaxed. Apparently, she solved it. Maren said. He grunted. They stayed in bed. That was harder for Tali than any roof Maren had ever seen him raise. From the workshop came the sounds of a morning being prepared by someone else. Shutters opened, tool drawers slid out. A broom crossed the floor. Iron touched iron. Ilani moved carefully at first, then the rhythm steadied. Maren remembered her own first morning with the wall of crooked nails. No ceremony, no encouragement. A hammer placed in her hand and work waiting in front of her. She understood now why Tali had done it that way. Confidence given too easily felt borrowed. Confidence earned remained when everyone else left the room. At sunrise, Maren and Tali finally went outside. Ilani had already set the Miller barn plans on the center bench. She had sharpened 3 chisels, checked the wagon wheel, and stacked the required hardware in a wooden tray. The cedar spirit level rested beside the plans. Tali picked up one chisel and examined the bevel. Ilani watched him without breathing. He ran his thumb lightly across the back. Too steep, her face fell. Then he put it down. For soft cedar, fine for the oak pins we need today. Ilani exhaled. Maren poured coffee from a pot she had brought across the yard. You could simply tell her she did well. Tali took a cup. I did. No, you described an angle. Ilani accepted her coffee. That is how he says it. Maren looked between them. Wonderful. Now there are two of you. The wagon left an hour later with Ilani driving. Tali sat beside her, but he did not take the reins. Maren rode in the back among the tools and oak stock, where the morning wind pulled loose strands of hair from her braid. As they descended the ridge, she looked back at the house. From that distance, the repaired master bedroom board could not be seen. Neither could the burn scar on the lumber stack, the old nail holes beneath the plaster, the place where the storm canvas had once torn, or the 3-degree shift Tali had made to catch winter light. A stranger would see only a house standing straight against the sky. Maren knew better. Straight did not mean untouched. It meant every failure had been found, understood, and answered with work strong enough to carry the next load. Ilani called from the wagon seat. Mother, did you bring the hinge template? Maren reached into the tool crate. No. The wagon stopped. Tali turned slowly. Ilani stared over her shoulder. Maren let them suffer for 2 seconds, then pulled the template from beneath her coat. Ilani groaned. Tali shook his head. That is cruel. Maren smiled. I learned from the best. The wagon rolled on toward the Miller place. Sunlight climbed over the desert behind them. It touched the house first, then the workshop roof, then the road where the crooked sale sign had once stood. The post was still there, weathered nearly gray. Years ago, Maren had considered pulling it out. Tali had stopped her. Fence is useful, he had said, so they left the post and used it to hang a gate. That morning the gate stood open while the wagon passed through. Ilani climbed down, swung it shut, and dropped the latch into place. The old post did not tremble. The nail that had once announced the sale was gone. In its place were 2 clean iron hinges, set square and driven true.